Peace to everybody. This is about biblical bad guys. The ancient Philistines came from Europe. DNA shows. The ancient Philistines, the biblical villains whose origins have puzzled scholars for decades, came to the Middle East from southern Europe more than 30,000 years ago. New DNA testing has shown. So there was a biblical villains that were from southern Europe more than 3,000 years ago, and the DNA testing has shown that it is who they say it is, and it's the truth. And here in the picture is one of the researchers or archaeologists, whoever, uncovering the skeletal remains, and over here is another skeletal remains, but it's the skull, and of course you can see a little bit of the bone there. An American archaeology student unearthed a skeleton during excavation work at the first ever Philistine cemetery at Ashkelon National Park in southern Israel, June 28, 2016. So there was an archaeologist. The person is American, and also the person is a student. And unearthed the skeleton during excavation works, and they were found in a Philistine cemetery at the Ashkelon National Park on June 28, 2016. The genetic findings came from skeletons unearthed by archaeologists in Israel in 2016, including the bones of infants buried beneath Philistine houses, archaeologists said in a paper published on Wednesday. So there was also even a little infant bones that were unearthed as well. They were finding them too, along with the adults as well. So yes, it's really hard to see a infant's skeletal that was buried beneath the Philistine houses. The much mangled group is regularly depicted as the enemy of the Israelites in biblical texts. The giant Goliath was a Philistine. So was Delilah, who entrapped legendary warrior Samson. And so there was Goliath, Delilah, and of course there was a legendary warrior named Samson. So yeah, they were in biblical texts during that time. So that's how they knew that the remains have been there. Thanks to their bad press, their name has also become synonymous with crassness, ignorance, and hostility to culture. So they were pretty bad people during that time, with all the hostility to culture, and of course the ignorance came with it. But for all their prominence, where they came from before settling the coast of what is now southern Israel and Gaza remained a mystery. So Gaza and Israel, southern Israel, they're going to remain a mystery for a very long time. So, and they're not going to, and other people are not really going to understand what is going on unless you do a lot of research on this place. Varying theories had asserted their ancestors originated in the Aegean or the northern Levant, or that they were actually a local culture. And so there was verifying theories and had inserted the ancestors or where they came from, and it was actually a local culture. Our study has shown for the first time that the Philistines immigrated to this region in the 12th century And it said Daniel Master, director of the Leon Levy expedition to Ashkelon, a coastal city where the first ever Philistine cemetery was found. Yeah, so there was a lot of studies have been shown for the first time that the Philistines immigrated to that that region during the 12th century, and that's way before Christ. I'll tell you that much. Daniel Master was also a director of the Leon Levy expedition to Ashkelon. We didn't show it by showing similar styles of pottery. We didn't show it by looking at text. We showed it by looking at the DNA of the people themselves, Master said. We can see it at Ashkelon, new DNA coming in from this immigrant population that is really changing the whole region. Yeah, so they didn't. So Master said he wasn't going shown by the looking at the text or by or any of the pottery or anything else. It was all through DNA, so they could note it in their writings or whatever of who these people are. The Ashkelon team sent more than 100 skeletal samples to Germany's Max Planck Institute for the Science of the Human History. DNA was found in 10 individuals, particularly in the inner ear bones that preserved it over the millennia. Here's the DNA was found in 10 individuals, and they only could find it through the inner ear that has been preserved for a very long time. The findings published on Wednesday in the journal Science Advances showed 3 stages: pre-migration, migration, and then a dilution of the genetic footprint within the local population a couple hundred years later. And so they found pre-migration, migration, then a dilution of the genetic footprint. So they could easily be identified. Although the genetic modeling suggests Southern Europe as the area of origin, there are some limitations to 3,000-year-old DNA testing, said Michael Feldman, an archaeogenetics who worked on the study at Max Planck. Yeah, so there are some limitations to 3,000-year-old DNA, but you can't go no further than that. You gotta go to where you're supposed to go, and that's going back to 30,000 years. This ancestral component is derived from Europe, or to be more specific, from Southern Europe, so the ancestors of the Philistines must have traveled across the Mediterranean and arrived in Ashkelon sometime between the end of the Bronze Age and the beginning of the Iron Age, Feldman said. Yeah, so the Philistines have traveled across the Mediterranean, and that's a very long travel to where they had to go, and they arrived at the Ashkelon sometime between the end of the Bronze Age and the beginning of the Iron Age. So there is pretty long journey for them. There would be a lot more that we can say if we had more data. For example, we could maybe more precisely pinpoint the source of those migrations, she said. And so there should have been more data, but there wasn't. They wanted to precisely pinpoint the source of the migration, but how can they when they didn't have enough data? And they said if we had more data, they could have precisely pinpoint how they got to where they got. Earlier work by the Ashkelon team has suggested the Philistines were actually no Philistines. Excavations of a 3,000-year-old cemetery in 2016 found bodies buried with jewelry and perfumed oil. So now they were not Philistines. Excavations of a 3,000-year-old cemetery. So they have proved that part. They found bodies buried with jewelry and perfumed oil. That's what they found. But they didn't think it was the Philistines, then it wasn't. So who were these people? If they were no Philistines, then who were they if they're not? And they will have to keep doing research on these skeletal remains to find out who they are, because they have traveled a very long way. Leave your comments below. I am out.